All. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for attending our event today. I'll wait for everybody to join, and then we'll get started in just one moment. Looks like everybody is into the room, so thank you all for attending today's event and current issues in renewable facility construction. My name is Greg Jacobson. This is an event put on by the Georgia Bar Association Construction Section. I'd like to thank the Berkeley Research Group for sponsoring this event and making it free for everyone to attend and get CLE as applicable. Let me introduce the chair of the Georgia Bar Construction Section to say a few words, Peter Crofton.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today, Greg. I appreciate all your efforts in putting this together. I really just wanted to say a couple of words about doing some outreach to fellow practitioners. You know, COVID's got us all kind of scattered, and a lot of people are back in silos and so forth. And now's a good time if you know somebody, you've been opposing counsel or across the table from someone, they're not in the section. You know, invite them to join. At some point, we're gonna have to rebuild the camaraderie in the bar, and that's best done by people getting together. And hopefully, we're about to get through this, and now's a good time to start that process. Greg, I'm gonna flip it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate it. So everybody knows how this is going to go. I'm going to introduce all of our wonderful, esteemed panelists. Then we'll get into some questions and discussion regarding renewable facility construction. Then we will have about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So if you think of any questions during the event, please write them down and bring them up near the end. So first, let me start by introducing Caitlin Beer. Caitlin is the Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for Leeward Renewable Energy in Dallas, Texas. In this position, she is responsible for providing and overseeing legal advice in support of Leeward's real estate, construction, equipment procurement, and project finance matters. Caitlin holds a JD from NYU Law and a BA from Duke University. Before joining Leeward, Caitlin was a partner in the Pittsburgh office of K&L Gates, where she specialized in real estate law with a particular focus on wind, solar, biomass, and battery storage projects. Next, we have Kurt Friesen. Kurt joined Apex Clean Energy in 2014, and as general counsel, leads its corporate legal department. In that role, he advises Apex's executive team and board of directors on legal and strategic matters. While at Apex, Kurt has served as internal legal lead on project finance transactions, power purchase agreements, equipment procurement, and EPC agreements. Prior to joining Apex, Kurt practiced with Winston & Strawn in Chicago and San Francisco, and with McGuire Woods in Charlottesville, Virginia. Kurt received his JD from Duke University and a BSc in Civil and Environmental Engineering from the University of Michigan. Next, we have Pablo Gonzalez Bringas, a senior attorney at Avangrid Renewables and Iberdrola subsidiary. Pablo is a licensed attorney in Spain and in Oregon, and his main focus is procurement, supply chain, and onshore operations. He mainly deals with the negotiation of EPC agreements, turbine supply agreements, and operation and maintenance agreements. Prior to his time at Avangrid, Pablo worked at Scottish Power Renewables and Gomez Acebo and Pombo in Spain. Our final panelist is Holly Christie, General Counsel of Hectate Energy, LLC. Holly oversees the legal aspects of all levels of development, financing, and management of the company's portfolio of domestic and international renewable energy assets. She manages corporate compliance, global governance, and general corporate issues, including substantive legal matters such as M&A, financing, real estate, and project development agreements. Holly received her JD from the University of Pittsburgh School of Law and received a BS and BA from the University of Colorado at Denver. Finally, let me introduce myself. My name is Greg Jacobson. I'm an attorney in the construction and procurement section here at King & Spalding. My practice involves the negotiation and drafting of a wide variety of construction-related agreements. Many of my projects are in the energy field with a focus on solar, renewable fuel, and battery storage projects, but I also work on multifamily and other commercial matters. I received my law degree from the University of Georgia School of Law and my undergraduate degree in music from Boston University. I am the secretary of the Georgia Bar Construction Section, and I want to thank you all for attending today. So let's dive right in. I've introduced each of our panelists, but I haven't said much about each of their companies. So if you could, let's go around and give our audience some information about the companies you represent, what your companies do, what they're currently involved in. Maybe Caitlin, we could start with you.
Sure, absolutely, and thank you for the introduction. So Leeward has been around for a while, but also not that long. We are kind of a legacy company that has had many names over the years, including Infigen, that some of you may recognize. So we do have a portfolio of 19 operating wind farms throughout the country, but in the last probably 3 or 4 years have really pivoted into a greenfield development shop as well. We develop to own and operate, so we are long-term owner operators in the space. We in the last few years have primarily brought online wind projects, but our current pipeline is a pretty broad mix of wind and solar throughout the country. In the first quarter of last year, Leeward completed the acquisition of the development platform of First Solar. So through that acquisition, acquired a 10 gigawatt solar development pipeline. So I have been learning about procuring modules as well as turbines, which has been interesting.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that later, let me tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that's Leeward. Thanks.
Kurt, how about yourself?
Sure. So I'm with Apex Clean Energy, which was established in 2009 here in Charlottesville, Virginia. When we began, we actually had an eye toward offshore wind. And as that kind of didn't go as quickly as we wanted, we shifted to onshore and have developed an enormous pipeline of wind and now solar projects as well. Historically, we've developed and then sold projects, either at the development stage, at the NTP stage, and we've done build transfers as well. Kind of maybe the flip side of what Caitlin described, we're pivoting a little bit to the owner operator IPP platform, and will be, the majority of the projects that we're building going forward will continue to own and operate. Right now, we're a pretty even mix of wind and solar. The projects that we're developing, historically, obviously, it's been a lot more wind, but we're active in wind, solar, storage, and green hydrogen now as well.
Great. Pablo?
Well, as you said, I work for Avangrid Renewables, which is a subsidiary of Iberdrola SA, which is a company from Spain. And here in the US, we operate, I think, a little bit over 20 states. And I think we own and control around 8,000 megawatts. And we focus mainly on wind and solar, and wind both onshore and offshore. And I'm very happy to say that we're working, actually now under construction, the Vineyard Wind project off the coast of Massachusetts. And that's the story of Avangrid.
Great, thank you. Holly?
Hi, I'm Holly Christie. I'm with Hecate Energy. So Hecate was put together back in 2012 from a couple of guys who had been knocking around the industry for a while. And Hecate is actually the goddess of the crossroads. So they thought that the renewable energy industry was at a kind of point of a crossroads, as well as their personal careers and starting a new company. So that's kind of a little bit of that. You see a lot of like male sun god named renewable energy companies. So when I was first recruited for Hecate, I was like, yeah, a lady goddess, I'm about it. So we focus mostly on storage, solar and solar plus storage. And then we have a sister affiliate that does standalone storage. And then because it's just so cool, like nobody's not doing a little bit of offshore wind, we always have to say like, and a little bit of offshore wind. So as much as everybody else is kind of dabbling in the offshore wind field, we are as well. We are working probably primarily with for our solar projects, domestically speaking, we have about a 4 gig a year pipeline that we're working through. So it's a lot of development. We also have a very, very teeny tiny sister affiliate of projects that we own and operate that are small. And they're still too big for me because owning and operating is a whole different enchilada. So there's a lot more like bells and whistles to keep pushing and all that kind of stuff. So so our bread and butter is developing and selling solar projects and solar plus storage projects and the storage projects. And then last year, we had a minority interest come in with a Spanish company called Repsol. And so we've been working with them to kind of up level. I can see Pablo and Hattie, up level kind of what we're doing and really take our development to the next level. So that's our forward-looking approach.
Wonderful. Thank you all. That's really interesting. That's great to know. So, you've all mentioned that you all do at least dabble or more, at least in solar energy. And before we kind of get on some of the broader issues that you're facing regarding renewables specifically, or generally, I'd like to get a little more specific and talk about some forced labor issues that have been all over regarding solar projects. And I'm curious whether you have had any forced labor issues that have affected your projects, if you've had any issues with U.S. Customs seizing any of your equipment or stopping anything from coming in, and how you are dealing with that on a company-wide basis. Is there anyone that would like to jump in on that?
So I can kick off because I've been talking about this a lot. Sorry, Kurt, do you want to go ahead?
No, Holly, please.
So we haven't had any specific issues with regard to some of our shipments or some of our equipment being stopped at the border, things like this. But of course, we're running into all the supply chain issues that are caused and coming out of this and everything that's kind of going on in China. And I think the main pinch and where we're really seeing the effects of kind of a domestic focus on these issues or a global focus on these issues is really for the first time we're seeing, and I'd be interested to see what you guys are saying about this too, even in the RFP process, a lot of our potential purchasers are wanting to see our policies on anti-slavery and anti-corruption and all of these kinds of things before, where they weren't asking for that before. So we went ahead and organized the process of putting in place a policy, and then we're working through putting in kind of the metrics and mechanics into our subsidiary contracts and kind of how that trickles down, especially in international contracts, pieces of, kind of attestations and, the stuff that we can do to hopefully affect change. But that's where we're kind of seeing that big pressure point is like all of a sudden, I think the public is more aware. As the public is more aware, the consumer of power becomes more aware, and they start putting that pressure on the developer.
Kurt, you were going to step in.
Yeah, no, I think Holly's, her experience is similar to ours. We're seeing a lot of requests from potential off-takers for our projects. We have a 70 megawatt solar facility in construction right now. We have not had any issues with panel delivery or anything like that, fortunately. In terms of how we're addressing it, I mean, we build our projects two ways. Sometimes we source the panels directly, and sometimes we will have our EPC contractor bundle it and source those modules as well. And so, a lot of what we're doing is on the contracting side and kind of pushing these requirements, whether to the EPC or to the module provider.
I think this whole forced labor issue is affecting the entire industry more than, each of our companies or the companies we represent. I read the other day on a magazine that this whole issue is potentially affecting 2.1 gigawatts of, solar development in the US only. We have to take into account that the polysilicon, which I believe is one of the key elements of the panels or the modules, is being manufactured in China. And the problem is that China, this is what I read, the area of China, which is Xinjiang, I think it's the name of the area in China where the problem is located, the way they're starting to manufacture the polysilicon, they're spreading it. So it's hard to track. So it's very complicated to track the supply chain of manufacturer. So how do you control when they ship something into the US, how do you control that the supply chain is clean, so to speak? So I think this is going to affect the whole industry more than just individual companies, in my opinion.
Certainly. Caitlin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think, we haven't had any issues on the module supplies side. Our solar, construction pipeline, everything happens to be for solar modules. So we're not facing sort of the polysilicon module supply issue. One interesting experience I did have when we were procuring a battery 5 or 6 months ago is that we had started, crafting these provisions in our contracts about forced labor and specifically referencing, the Xinjiang and, Uyghur labor. And, when we were procuring directly from a sort of a Chinese company through an American affiliate, they sort of agreed to take the contractual risk, but we couldn't use the words like slavery or forced labor for like political reasons. They wouldn't put any of that in the contract. So we had to sort of use geographic references, interestingly, but it was sort of a political issue for them within China to even use those words. I don't know if others have had that experience, but
That's
it was a
interesting.
very interesting outcome.
Huh, that is interesting. And I'm a little curious, I want to dive down a little deeper into this because a few of you mentioned different ways of handling this contractually. That's really interesting. I've never heard of doing it that way, Caitlin. And Kurt and Holly, you mentioned different ways, regarding perhaps having representations of warranties regarding forced labor. You might have audit rights all the way down the supply chain, regarding multiple tiers of the suppliers. I don't know if you're considering putting the risk on the supplier that they would not receive, say, schedule adjustments if it's being stopped by U.S. Customs, anything along that. Is there anything specific that you're trying to put in your contracts outside of general policies that would try and put the risk on the supplier, or how are you handling it contractually?
So I think with regard to shifting the risk to the supplier, we can do that. Sometimes you see suppliers push back and say, we can take this additional liability, but it's going to cost you. Mm-hmm. So, and where my mind goes to when I'm starting to think of that analysis is, this is an international contract in a country sometimes that doesn't have its own internal policies regarding this kind of thing. So how valuable is this rep or warranty, right? And if there is something that's coming in, will we be able to effectively chase it down? And then from a more personal level, like, is this actually helping anybody? It's like at the end of the day, are we paying more to actually do something? Because I think that's the kind of underlying value that people kind of get, they lose when they start thinking about these kinds of things. So there's this big initial push to like run out and say, okay, we're going to hire a big law firm. There's nothing wrong with big law firms. I also worked at K&L like Caitlin, but to like put all these crazy policies in place and they're all sparkly and we'll do this and they'll take that and there's liability over there. But like effectively, like, are you making any change? And that's, I think, a question that I like to think about and say, hey, what's the bang for the buck that we can do for the company that, like, one, gets us to a place where we can continue to be really flexible with sourcing our materials, but also we feel good about sourcing those materials and that we're doing everything that we can do that will be effective, kind of out there in those sticky humanitarian situations.
I will say that I specialize in sparkly, so I do appreciate that. Kurt, how about you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say as a bit of a pragmatist, I mean, a lot of the language that we are incorporating into supply agreements and other things are intended to give some comfort to our project participants, our off-takers and others. So, I agree with Holly. It's hard to assess whether that language is actually helping the situation or not. It's a complicated issue for sure, but just again, as a practical matter, the language that we're adding is, we feel, essential to giving some comfort to our counterparties that we're doing the things that we can do.
Great, thank you. Caitlin, Pablo, any other thoughts? Pablo, you're on mute.
Sorry. Just wanted to add that it's also a little sad that this is all happening now, especially now we need renewable energy more than ever, especially with the climate change. It's very sad.
Definitely.
And I think these new regulations are fairly new. I think some were passed last June, the withhold release orders for shipments from China. We don't know exactly until one shipment is detained, how long it's going to take, what are the consequences? It's still too new, in my opinion, in order to overcome the situation.
Definitely. No, definitely. Thank you. Caitlin, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I would echo what Kurt says about a lot of the language we're putting in our contracts being a little bit aspirational, and probably in our, sparkling new supply chain policies. And one of the things we talk a lot about internally is kind of the cost benefit of having these policies and having these provisions. Is it better to and overlaying that with the timeline and realities of constructing a project and bringing it online? My personal view is that it is fairly unlikely that, absent some political pressure or third-party action, that we are actually going to, on a casual Thursday afternoon, decide to exercise our supply chain audit rights. And because I just don't know if people have time for it,
Sure.
And then the question really becomes like, is it better to not have a policy, or to have a policy that you're lax about enforcing? And so it's just something we're still trying to wrap our heads around, frankly, about what that right balance is between all of the beautiful words that we write and how we actually perform in a world in which you are moving a million miles an hour.
Great points. Totally agree. So let's move on to, we talked about, I'm sorry, did someone say?
Just like a super quick comment. One of the things that I am really excited about, though, is that I started off in humanitarian law and then came into oil and gas. And these are common problems for transnational supply chain companies, regardless of where you're coming out of, right? And a lot of other industries that aren't as young are playing catch up. So they're like, how do we clean up the dirtiness? Whereas what makes me really excited about renewable energy is that, like, we're still new enough to say, how do we integrate these concepts at the very beginning of what we're doing? So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And that really makes me happy that, like, in our industry, we're talking about it so much already.
Definitely. Wonderful. So we've talked about the specific, and let me move back a little bit and just talk about the general. Pablo, maybe let's start with you. What would you say, and this is an extremely broad question, but what are the biggest issues that you think is facing the construction of renewable facilities today?
COVID. In my opinion, COVID. Like, dealing with a lot of suppliers that are suffering from COVID. Health and safety issues, delays in schedules. That's pretty much my day-to-day work nowadays. Like, we're late in constructing, we're late in receiving materials. Anything breaks in a wind farm, anything breaks in a solar module, we're late because suppliers are not willing to risk their own employees, and that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, well, let's come back to the general question later. Let's talk about COVID. I mean, certainly it's affected everybody and everything. I think we were saying in the waiting room before this that 1 in 4 people have experienced it directly at this point, or had it in some strain. How has it affected your projects? What is your company doing to try and mitigate these issues?
In our case, we're trying to mitigate this through including COVID language into our force majeure provisions. Like, we're making it a force majeure event.
Sure.
But it has to be a force majeure, not just, hey, we're the supplier, we're not going to be able to perform under the contract because the pandemic is still up in the air. No,
Sure.
You have to prove that you cannot mitigate, you cannot control, you cannot prevent, that you're not being negligent about it. I mean, you cannot say, I cannot send 4 employees to your wind farm, even though it's open air, open space, because, there's COVID. No, you have to treat that as a force majeure event. That's how we're doing it. Because otherwise we will never be able to finish any projects until the pandemic is over.
Sure. Yeah.
That's how we're tackling it.
Holly, how about you?
So I think we've made a switch because at the beginning of the pandemic, I tried to slap in a lot of COVID language around the force majeure qualifications. But then I started to worry that now that it's gone on for quite a period of time, it's not reasonably unforeseeable. So a lot of state laws will require that something, even if it's named as a force majeure issue, be reasonably unforeseeable. And the question is, are delays due to COVID actually reasonably unforeseeable? Because my life now is just mayhem. It's like mayhem is my job title.
Sure.
So what we've started doing is inserting where we can, like just a separate kind of provision around COVID that says, hey, if there are state specific requirements that don't allow us to come on to our construction land, if we're unable to get contractors, if we have delays that are due specifically to COVID, and we can point that out, then we're going to have a permitted extension. So we don't have to jump through the force majeure hoop that's sometimes a little bit flamey and ugly, but we still get the same effect. But yeah, it's definitely causing, problems. I mean, and I think it will for still another year out there.
If only that, hopefully. Caitlin, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, we're also doing sort of a standalone COVID provision on the EPC side. Our sort of biggest bugaboo with our contractors is vetting a COVID plan that they have to put in place up front that's reasonable and satisfies our health and safety standards, but also being very clear that if they don't comply with their policy, they don't get force majeure relief. I don't care what happens. If you said you were taking temperature checks, you didn't, and a whole crew goes down, your problem, your dollar, not mine. And then I think, on the supply side, I'm kind of I'm sure everyone else speaking today at the start of the pandemic received just an absolute flurry of COVID force majeure claims from our suppliers, our O&M providers, everybody in the world. And I spent a lot of time writing back letters that said, you haven't proved there's an actual impact, blah, blah, blah. I don't have that much time for that anymore, so I kind of put them in a bin right now, unless I know there's like a real impact to our project. I think there's definitely still, and listen, we do the same thing, right? We take a very conservative approach under our PPAs of notifying for COVID impacts, but I just get less animated about alleged COVID delays than I probably did 18 months ago.
Kurt, any thoughts?
A couple. One that immediately comes to mind is, we talk supply chain and supplying of equipment. What we've seen, the work is just more slowly done, right? You can't have as many workers in a tower at the same time, right? Like if you have certain safety precautions in place, those safety precautions do impact the rate at which work can be done. And so that has had an impact on our projects. These all have tight deadlines. There can be tax qualification ramifications of missing certain deadlines. And, I think as everyone would agree, we are very concerned about the health and safety of the folks that are working at our projects. And so, as Caitlin said, we want to make sure that our contractors' COVID response plans are in line with our company's values and how we want to treat this. But it's going to impact the construction schedule. There's no question about it. And, similar to what everyone has mentioned, we're addressing it contractually. I think it was Holly that mentioned the unforeseeable nature of a COVID claim at this point. And, we've probably all drafted similar language that talks about unforeseen circumstances arising from COVID that could potentially trigger force majeure. But it's been a challenge. And, as Caitlin said, we have contracts under which we have provided force majeure notices, right? We have offtake agreements and, that have certain deadlines for us. And for a long time, municipalities may not be having their permitting hearings and commissioners meetings and things like that as a result of COVID, and that impacts the entire timeline of a project. So, we have been both playing offense and defense with respect to COVID.
Yeah, wonderful. Completely agree. It's been a struggle for everyone, but hopefully things will get back to a reasonable period at some point. So to go back to then the original question, maybe Kurt, let's stay with you. So outside of COVID, outside of forced labor issues, what do you feel are some of the biggest issues facing the construction of renewable facilities today?
Gosh, unfortunately, Pablo stole my answer. I mean, COVID, I think, is number one. Supply chain issues, number two. They're certainly related. Outside of that, I mean, it's a absolutely wonderful time to be a developer of projects. The demand for what we're doing is at an all-time high. It's easy to focus on the negative, but there's a lot of really positive things going on in our industry right now. Policy-wise, whether it's government policies of corporations focusing on renewable energy. For us, it's been, 2021 was not an awesome year for the world, but for our company, it was fantastic. 2020 was as well. And so there are good stories out there, even in a world of COVID. So, that doesn't really answer your question, Greg.
No, hey, but listen, I think it's a great thing to say and something that we don't pay enough attention to. I mean, things are hard for a lot of people in a lot of places, but things are also great in other ways as well. So like you said, it's never been a better time to be a developer, to be building some of these renewable energy facilities. In many ways, though, it has also never cost more to build some of these facilities. I mean, prices have been rising for everything. I see nods across the screen as everybody talks about this. I mean, it used to be that you could lock in a 20-year PPA and that would be, a fine price, but with the way that costs are rising and sharply and in short periods of time, it has been difficult for some companies to price out how much it's going to build a facility in the future. So I'm curious for your companies, how far ahead in the future you're looking forward to new projects and how you're kind of pricing in whether prices are going to keep rising, whether you think that things are going to level off a little bit, and how you feel things are going to be in the future. Anyone want to jump in on that? Or I'll call on someone. Caitlin, you want to talk about how your company is looking for the future?
Sure. So my experience in the last couple of years that I've been at Leeward has been that we actually have contracted fairly late on the PPA side. And it adds a lot of stress to my life and really can put a lot of pressure on the construction timeline, but does have the added benefit of proximity in time when you're going through procurement. I will say, as we're in growth mode, and as we have grown our team, it has given us the headcount, frankly, to be able to contract further out into the future. I think that is a balancing act, and especially in an inflationary environment. I think, the bulk of what I have seen get contracted in the recent past has been 2023 projects. There may be a few 2024s floating around there. Obviously, our development pipeline extends way, way, way past that. But this is just, the assets that we view as ripe and attractive to off-takers. So, it has been an interesting year. We have had a few projects where we have gone back and renegotiated PPAs. That requires some creative thinking, and has often involved kind of a portfolio approach where, we'll put additional projects into the mix to get a better price on a near term project that was getting really, compressed returns because of the increases in costs.
Mhm.
Frankly, we've also had projects where we've walked away from PPAs and lost our security because at the end of the day, we felt that we could get a better price and overall, improve the return, and even giving effect to losing the security, it was, best for the business.
Right. Holly, any thoughts there?
So I agree with, all of Caitlin's strategies and kind of what they're going through. I think that's pretty industry wide for sure. So what, Hecate is pretty forward looking. So we're mainly right now talking about 2024 projects. We've got a couple of folks approaching us about 2025 projects, and we've never really been shy about just roping the cattle in. Let's go ahead and do it. But that causes a lot of problems and a lot of heartaches, when you have an expectation that you're going to an altar, but then you can't find a wedding dress, for example, or something. So what I do like that's coming out of this weird situation with all this uncertainty with supply chain and COVID and China and everything that's happened in the last 2 years is that you do see counterparties for the first time ever kind of understanding that flexibility and getting creative and kind of having these conversations is more the name of the game. And that's what I think the saving grace is. And I really hope that the industry kind of trends that way, because it's like one thing to say, we're locking everything in, this is it, you're screwed or I'm screwed, or somebody's going to take this grandiose fall. It's really extreme and it's very difficult versus like, hey, we don't know what's going on. We're trying, to kind of affect this deal. And if we need to come back and kind of get creative and rejigger some things, or kind of look at portfolioization as a way to, or hedging or something like this, we can take those tools and we can see what we can do to maximize profits while also being able to plan something for the future. Because yeah, you need to be creative, which is a lot of fun, but it's also very stressful.
Kurt, Pablo, any additional thoughts?
Well, Greg, I think Holly and Caitlin put it perfectly. I mean, I share a lot of those concerns with them. How far ahead we plan our projects, well, it depends, but 2024, 2025. But I really don't know. I don't have much to add besides what Caitlin and Holly said. Like, I completely agree and relate.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would maybe add is, it helps to have good counterparties, right? It helps to have someone that will work with you that understands. The sophisticated counterparties, I think, are the best, right? Who understand the issues and what we're doing. And so, we have been fortunate to work with great partners on offtake and have worked with us in a lot of ways. You don't always have that benefit, but when you can, it's a great thing to have.
Great, thank you. I do want to take advantage of the fact that we have 4 wonderful in-house attorneys here for your businesses to talk a little bit about utilizing outside counsel. We do have a fair number of private attorneys on the conference call, on the Zoom call. So I'm curious for each of you how you utilize outside counsel, whether you use them at all, if it's just for litigation, if it's for transactional work, and what you might look for when you're selecting outside counsel. Anyone want to jump in?
I'm happy to take a crack at this one, Greg. So we work with a lot of outside counsel. Our legal budget is enormous and something I'm still trying to get my arms around. But on every project financing that we do, those are the biggest drivers of our legal fees. Those are big, complicated transactions. We have, I would say 4 or 5 law firms that we work with primarily, that we've worked with for a number of years. To me, it's the relationships that we have with those lawyers that really drive the business back to those folks. I personally love lawyers that just own the project, right? They know more about it than I do. They are reminding me of things that I should be doing. That I think that particularly for young lawyers working at law firms, just, taking ownership of the work you're doing and not waiting to be asked to do something, but thinking proactively and thinking about how you can help your clients make their lives easier. We're doing a lot of transactions at all times. We have our corporate legal team is 5 attorneys right now. We're actually hiring if anyone is interested in applying, but we have more work than we can handle internally, and that's a great problem to have. But as a result, we demand a lot from our outside counsel, and I'm happy to report that they've always delivered for us, and we've never had an issue where our counsel kind of was the reason a deal didn't go through. And so that's a good place to be in, particularly if you're responsible for hiring the lawyers. You never want to have to answer to your executive team that the deal didn't close because your lawyers couldn't pull it off. So that to me is the biggest thing. Just, do you have the experience? Do you know the industry? And will you take the project and own it so I can sleep at night?
I agree with Kurt. I don't use law firms that often. We tend to do a lot of work inside within the borders of the company. But for me, what I expect when I use an external law firm, it's the same that the business folks, which is the different departments of the company I work for, expect from me, because they are my clients. So I expect the experience and knowledge, take the initiative, as Kurt just mentioned. I think that's key. And communication. I want to make sure that anytime I raise a question, I'm going to receive a clear answer. Always be available. I know that's tough, but being a lawyer is that your client comes first. And that's also my policy within the company. I'm always available, even if I'm on vacation. I don't care. If a client needs you, you're there. You have to be there. Otherwise, don't be a lawyer. So that's what I expect from law firms as well. But reputation, experience, and communication, key for me.
Caitlin, Holly, any thoughts?
I think to build on that, so as a woman that came up in a predominantly male field, in a predominantly male law firm, I tend to look first for kind of equality measures, gender and racial equality. Like, I deal with a lot of old white guys with really big egos, and it's a lot, right? So if I can find an attorney, because you can always teach somebody how to do this. Like, it's not rocket science. You can teach somebody and bring them up to speed on the market. You can show them a complex document. If they've worked other complex deals, they're going to get it, but you can't teach them decency. So the attorneys that I go back to are the people that it's like, hey, it's a pleasure to spend 7 hours turning a document with you. It's like, I would want to, kind of hang out with you, and you seem like you're a person that's like a human underneath, kind of the automaton that works for like some millions and millions of billing hours that are required these days at firms. So that's really, really important to me, to make sure that, I'm promoting folks that I saw didn't get a shot. And of course they have to be super smart and crackerjack and all that kind of stuff. But also, I remember when I first started working in-house, and it was with a lot of finance lawyer guys. And, they're very like competitive and very bro-y, and they're like, yeah. And I was working with this one older gentleman, and I loved him because he was brilliant, and he would have all these like very quiet mic drop moments, and you were like, oh my God, shock. But he said to me once, my job is to make you look good, not to like make like you get the deal done and you get the credit and you look good to your boss so that you get all the accolades you need to like, then bring me into more deals. He's like, my job isn't like to take the glory of the deal and be like, I have done the deal, but to make you, get the glory of the deal. And I really, really appreciated that, because I was like, wow, that's true. Like this is, external counsel is like a customer service role, and you have to really, I think, kind of juggle a lot of potential clients and say, who am I best serving? And a lot of times I think counsel sometimes forgets that it's not themselves. So that's one of the things I really, really look for in external counsel, is that concept.
That's a great point. Thank you, Ellie. Definitely. Caitlin, any thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. So I think I'll echo a lot of the things other folks have said. We do use outside counsel a fair amount, particularly on project financings. We do also use outside counsel on EPC, not 100% of the time, particularly if we're dealing with repeat player. But quite often when we're entering into a deal with a new EPC partner, we will utilize outside counsel to really drive that transaction. I think my perspective is a little different than Pablo's. Maybe I still bear the scars of being recently a law firm partner, but I don't expect my counsel to be available to me 24/7, 365. And it's important to me not to be available to the business 24/7, 365. One of the things that have been working on and really intend to continue to work on is the way to set up appropriate boundaries with my commercial partners, because we're all rowing in the same direction. But I don't know if others have felt this, but I think not just in our industry, but in all industries, with the onset of COVID and working from home, the expectations around availability and response times have just become crazy. And I think I certainly expect my counsel, when we have a very meaningful and real deadline, to get it together. And I'm going to be working late and they're going to be working late and we're all going to be working late and long. And that happens, and that's the nature of the business. But I do try to, I think, because I ask for grace for myself to not have to be on all weekend, every weekend, that I try to, and I'm not out there suggesting Pablo is harassing his outside counsel 24/7 on the weekend by any means. But, I think for me, the keys are responsiveness, realistic deadlines. I have a bad habit, and so I've noticed it in other people, of saying oh yeah, no problem, I'll get that to you by Friday. And then, our whole business is just my day-to-day just feels like everything is on fire all the time, and I'm just putting out fires all day. So Friday becomes Monday or Tuesday. And so now I notice when people do that to me. And so give me a longer time. Be under promise and over deliver, I think is a key, one of my key phrases for 2022 that I'm working towards.
Nice.
But yeah, so definitely responsiveness, quality of advice, the value proposition, I think certainly plays into it. And certainly to echo Holly's point, do I like this person as a person? And are they practical? For me, I want to get a deal. We're all here to get deals done. I'm not here to have the perfect deal. It's never going to be a perfect deal. We're here to manage risk, not to eliminate risk for the business. And it's important to me to have outside counsel who understand that and can help us sort of balance that act correctly.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing, Greg, and I'll invoke a phrase that we probably all hate, which is that's not market, or that is market, when you're talking about, a certain contractual provision. And one thing that's important to me and our team is when we get outside counsel, that they actually know what market is, and they can actually say, what is, whether they use it as a negotiating tactic, I hope not, but at least tell us Like, we know what we do in our deals, but we want to know, honestly, what are they seeing from other clients? What are they seeing in similar deals? What is in their mind the market? And that's some of the most important stuff that we get out of our outside counsel. A lot of the deals that we do again and again and again. But we need that perspective from our outside counsel on, what are the trends? What are other people doing? Kind of what is reasonable and what is beyond kind of the bounds of reason and what we're asking for.
Yeah, that industry experience is very important. So before we get too far in, I want to take the last few minutes and see if any of our attendees have any questions for one or more of our panelists. Are there any questions from the group? You can put it in the chat, or you can just go off of mute and speak.
I want to know why Pablo is so demanding of his lawyers.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, because I'm thinking about big transactions I've been involved in.
I know.
I didn't mean like, Caitlin, like 365 days, 24/7. Hey, it's Sunday, 3 a.m. Pick up the phone. No.
I couldn't resist. Sorry, Pablo.
But it's fair, and I think Caitlin, you were right. I mean, it's fair to say that sometimes it's not possible, but sometimes when you're also dealing with a very big project, you're purchasing, I don't know, 200 wind turbines, and you're literally swamped, and you don't have an answer to something that is very specific. You do need the expert from a lawyer to help you out in that circumstance. And he must be, or she must be ready to pick up the phone. That's what I mean.
Sure, definitely. No, I mean, availability is part of
Correct.
the industry, with boundaries, hopefully, but within that.
As a Mediterranean, I'm passionate.
I think we're all passionate, hopefully, about what we do. So if there's any questions, please do speak up or type in the chat. If not, I will continue to ask questions, which I think is wonderful.
Hey, Greg, this is Peter. I've got a quick question.
Please.
We're seeing, a big push to go to electric cars and other, electrification of what have previously been fossil fuel fired stuff. And obviously that's going to put a big demand on the grid, and it's going to put a big demand on generation. What are you hearing inside the industry about our ability to make this transition and what it's going to take?
That's a big question, and I mean, I probably, before I say anything, I have to caveat that, like, I'm just a lonely little lawyer that sits in a corner and works on paper. But what I do see in renewable energy space is, it's going great guns. There's no way, even with all of us going flat out in my company, that we can fulfill the demand that's out there. So I think, and it's not just demand for energy, it's demand for storage as we build out the infrastructure of the grid to accommodate renewable energy and other energy sources that aren't necessarily working the same way that fossil fuel energy sources were. So, like, if you take that as like a indication, it's like I think the next 10 years are going to be really, really transformative for what's happening specifically with domestic renewable energy and the underlying infrastructure that supports that.
Yeah, well, what I'm seeing is a lot of really smart people thinking really creatively about how to address these issues, and that's exciting. And whether it's wind or solar or storage, or whether it's green fuels, there are just a lot of exciting things going on, and I think there are lots of potential solutions that will come together to address demand. I have not personally, again, just another lawyer sitting in the corner, but I have not heard concerns that production will not be able to meet the energy demand.
I have a question. I like to follow up on Peter's question, which I think was good, and I was thinking along those lines also. For some of us who remember solar initiatives going back many decades, I believe several of us remember those. It seems like things are different now. In other words, that the industry is growing and is going to grow independent of government assistance. And Kurt, could you like to hear all of y'all on this, but particularly you, Kurt, because you mentioned that the last 2 years have been great for your company in terms of growth, even in the face of COVID. So do y'all think that this will continue to grow in multiple phases, regardless of any type of public assistance?
So I'll address that first. I think we're to the point on the cost curves for both solar and wind that they have become the most efficient ways to produce electricity. They can do so at a highly competitive rate. And so, we're seeing potentially the phase out of tax incentives to these types of projects. And, those deadlines keep getting pushed out, but the industry, I feel like, has been planning for it for years and years and years, because there is always a potential future where there's no longer, government incentive programs for renewable energy. So I personally don't think that, in the absence of government programs encouraging renewable energy, that the projects would cease to be built. The story is just far too compelling, both financially and otherwise, to stop the growth. So I think the industry is, still somewhat nascent, right? There's plenty of room for growth still.
Great. So I've gotten a few questions in my chat. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll see how many we can get through, but at least the first one, question for the panel. This is a fairly new industry with up and coming players, but still relatively few main players, suppliers, contractors, etc. It seems like this can have an effect on the owner's leverage during contract negotiations. Have you experienced this with any of your projects? Caitlin, Holly?
A big question. So I would say, so I've been at Hecate the last 3 years, and just in that time, we've doubled in our workforce, we've doubled in our size, we've doubled in kind of the megawatts that we're producing. So I have seen a difference in our approach to contracting, and I think this may be what you're getting at with this question. In that, like, when you're the small puppy in the pile, you have to be ready to get really creative when you're contracting with a much larger dog in the yard. But as we work forward with things, you get a little bit more experience, you get a little bit more reputation, your relationships with people build, and you can use that to get things slid over a little bit to more your advantage. But for sure, I mean, if you're anybody kind of contracting for an offtake agreement with one of the big boys like Google or Amazon or something like that, like there's a distinct power difference, and they definitely use that leverage just a little bit.
Gotcha. Any one last word from anyone?
I think you see a difference as you're building and developing more projects. You're able to do things like frame agreements where you're purchasing turbines or panels or even EPC services across a platform of projects. And when you can do that, you can give a supplier certainty on what services they'll be able to sell. You can get obviously better prices. So that's one example of kind of how size and might can kind of help you get better terms on your contracts.
Great. Well, let me take this opportunity to thank you all of our wonderful panelists. I'm sorry that I can't thank you in person, but the advantage of this, of course, is that we can get people from all across the country to come in and talk with us. Thank you all for taking the time. I think this has been a really illuminating and interesting discussion. Thank you all.
Thank
This
you.
concludes today's
Thanks,
meeting.
everyone.
Good morning.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Take care.